Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. Hey everybody, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 146. In this episode, I interview Kris from Crop Culture. He has been gardening for 5 years and is big into crop steering, which is what we're going to get into in today's episode. He talks all about the basics of crop steering, everything from what crop steering is, types of crop steering, climate, lighting, irrigation, and so much more. If you want to see short clips of these podcast episodes, search Garden Talk Clips on YouTube. I also have a gardening channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who helped make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their humidifiers, which can help increase the humidity in your grow space. Their humidifiers have 10 different levels and smart control features such as VPD and humidity programming, so you can get precise humidity control. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their humidifiers, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Stash Blend is a 2-1-5 plant additive that can be used with synthetic bottled nutrients or in living soil systems. Simply mix half teaspoon of Stash Blend into a gallon of water, then water your plants with it. Ingredients include corn steep liquor, seaweed extract, humic acid, beneficial bacteria, silica, and mycorrhizal fungi. Check it out at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. Mars Hydro. Check out their new 2024 LED grow lights. First, the SP3000. This grow light was designed specifically for greenhouse cultivation. They also have the SP3000R model, which is a red supplemental light, 650 to 665 nanometers. They have the VG40 40-watt light, which is for seedlings and veg, and the VG80 80-watt light, which is similar to the VG40, but for a larger grow space. Go to their website, mars-hydro.com, for more details, and you can use the discount code MrGrowIt to save on any of their products. And we're back, and I'm joined with Kris from Crop Culture. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Today we're going to talk all about crop steering. So you actually reached out to me several months ago and wanted to be on the podcast to talk shop. And I like talking shop. And you gave me some suggestions for things that we could kind of get into and lots of good topics to choose from. But I really narrowed it down to that crop steering one because I think that's becoming more and more popular these days amongst folks. I get more and more questions about it. And yeah, figured we would dive into that one this time around and talk about your experience doing it. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into gardening?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I got into gardening was actually through growing, and I'll explain. I think that my story and why I started growing is very relatable, I think, to most growers that are coming into the scene nowadays, and they're going to dispensaries and they are having really poor experience after poor experience, and they're overpaying for product that is over dried and it's rushed to the shelves and it's stale and it's flavorless and it has no effects, and you're spending hundreds, thousands of dollars, and at a certain point you say enough is enough. And fortunately, Illinois went legal back in 2020, and that was when I decided to jump on board with it. And I did like most people, and I went and Googled, best place to buy seeds and best equipment and all of those things, and was ushered into the corrals that are in place with SEO to make sure that you're landing on white labeled seed banks and the big brands that are paying the top dollar for SEO. So I, like many, went and bought all of those recommendations and had really poor results, actually. Surprise, surprise, with the first couple of runs. But I really enjoyed the growing aspect of it, the nurturing for something living. And it inspired a curiosity in me to want to get better at this. And that's kind of just in my nature to when I pick up a hobby, I want to be the best at it, or the best that I can be. And I went through exhaustive lengths to get more knowledgeable on this plant and start to understand it at a biological level. And it ultimately led me to Living Soil, and specifically Build a Soil and Jeremy Silva. I really gravitated towards his message, and it really aligned with who I am as a person. And I started digging deeper and deeper into Living Soil, and that's what led me to gardening, because gardening is, to me, in my mind, is a much more, it's a much broader term. And to me, there's a spiritual element to it as well. But I started growing all sorts of things outside, and my wife and I collect houseplants, and we amassed this huge collection of house plants that we had to, dwindle down to just the rare and exotic ones, because, everybody can go get a snake plant or, money trees and things like that. So the gardening has stemmed from growing medicinal plants indoors, and I've taken the grows outdoors, and it has deepened my connection with nature, my appreciation for the balance that exists in nature. And it's really just been a beautiful evolution. So, it was really just a constant dissatisfaction with the dispensary market that led me to growing my own medicinal herbs, which led to, gardening many other things, fruits and vegetables and flowers, things that bring me a lot of joy.
That's awesome. And I know you've gone so far to do a couple different things in the industry that's notable. Number one, a podcast. You've got the Growers Hangout. You're a part of that one. If you can talk about that for a minute. And then also the crop culture box. Can you talk to us about those things?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I started a podcast weekly every Tuesday with my friend Aaron, Support Dope People, and Pete of Heisenturp Brothers. And it is a community-based platform where we, try to provide value to our viewers, and we're trying to bring guests and experts on that are bringing a unique perspective, and it really does cater to newer growers. And not to say that experienced growers can't find benefit. We've had people like Miles from Weed Should Taste Good speaking about Living Soil and fermented plant extracts, and we've had Eric from Thrive Yahweh who came on and talked about the value of lactobacillus and his products, and it was just an amazing deep dive into the science of it. And it's been a really fun thing to do, to be able to share the things that I do in my garden, the things that I've experienced a positive benefit from with people, to see if that's something that they would like to adopt and do it themselves. And as it relates to the crop culture box, so crop culture again was again stemming from that whole dispensary thing. And when I started growing, as a collector myself, pop culture being a very important part of my life, being a child of the 80s, and being, growing up through, I don't even think it's arguably the most profound time in American history when it came to pop culture. And I incorporate a lot of those things into the business. So what crop culture is a premium, thoughtfully curated growers box that releases quarterly. They're theme boxes where I partner with the best breeders in the industry and the best brands in the industry. And I do the research to make sure that these are the best products, and these are things that get my stamp of approval. And I am able to leverage, wholesale pricing with my partners, and I pass those savings along to my customers. These boxes are truly an unbeatable value. And the reason why I'm able to do this is because I have a really good day job that I'm very fortunate for, that it pays the bills, and it affords me the opportunity to kind of do this as a creative venture and give back to the community, which I feel has given so much to me. And not being a very financially driven person, I would rather pack more value into the box, because at the end of the day, I want something that I would be excited about. I have very discerning taste, and I want every single person to open their box and be blown away by what they received. And you always are going to get much more than what what I advertise. I always under promise and over deliver. And I work with a lot of up and coming breeders as well. They might not be the featured breeder for the box because I have to leverage recognition and things like that. But they send me packs, and it's a platform to help them grow as well, and share their genetics with people, and get them engaging with these breeders and helping them grow. So it's really been a beautiful way to harmoniously bring together breeders and brands, and it's not a competitive thing. It is just this, everybody can benefit from it.
Awesome. Good stuff there. All right, let's get into the topic before people start complaining in the comment section.
Let's do it.
Crop steering. Break it down for us. A lot of beginners tune into my show as well. What is crop steering?
Yeah, so crop steering in a nutshell is taking, the way that we refer to it is taking your indoor garden and altering the variables of your lighting, your climate, and your irrigation to steer the outcome of your plants and your phytochemical profiles in your plants. So your cannabinoids, flavonoids, terpenes. We are trying to influence yield and flavor and potency, essentially, with crop steering.
And then there's a couple different types. There's vegetative steering and then generative steering. First off, what is vegetative steering? What is meant by that?
Vegetative steering, and the difference between that and generative steering is triggering the light cycle for photoperiod plants. So this is where you are in an indoor environment, switching your light cycle to 12 hours on, 12 hours off to trigger that flowering cycle. There are things that you can also do with that light cycle in terms of the light duration and intensity to also influence the outcome of your plants. But in vegetative steering, this is where we are going to be adjusting inputs like our humidity and our lighting and as well as our irrigation to influence how our plant grows, how vigorously it grows. There are ways to slow down growth if you're like me and are really bad at planning your grows, and sometimes run into a situation where you have small plants that you don't have anywhere to put and you have to wait for your tents to open up. There are ways that you could safely and do it with minimal impact to your plants, reduce the growth of your plant and have it pick right back up as soon as you get it transplanted. So that is basically what we're going to be talking about today, are some of the experiences that I've had adjusting those various inputs to have dramatically different results in many of the plants that I've grown out over the years.
You mentioned having to slow down plant growth, and it's I kind of laugh a little bit because I actually released a whole video on titled "How to Slow Down Plant Growth," and that definitely raised some eyebrows for sure. But the thing was, I was going on vacation, right, and I didn't want to come back and have the plants growing into the light, and so yeah, there are things that sometimes you do need to slow down plant growth, but that's definitely a separate topic there. Okay, so good definitions on both of those things. Let's get into, to start, we'll break down each individual thing. You talked about climate and then light intensity and irrigation. Let's start with the climate. And I think one of the things that come to mind is the temperature. Day temps versus night temps. So can you kind of break it down for us? Like, what are you typically aiming for day temps? What do you aim for night temps? What impact the difference has on plant growth, so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So this might be a little controversial, but I kind of like high temperatures. When I am in veg, when my plants are, I would say, 3 weeks old, all the way through up until week 6 of flower, I like high temperatures. I am completely fine with my tents reaching 90 degrees, 92 degrees, as long as you have adequate humidity for the phase of growth that your plant is in, adequate air exchange and air flow. So I have a 4x2 living soil bed in a 4x2 tent. And I often have troubles keeping the temperatures down in that tent. I've had issues with heat stress. There is a healthy amount of stress I think is acceptable and actually needed in every plant's life, I think, to bring out the best expressions, because let's face it, we're trying to, this is biomimicry when we're talking about growing indoors. If you look outdoors in the summertime, you go outside if you're growing an outdoor plant and it is 95 degrees outside, your plant is praying, why is that? And the humidity might be 40% out there. I think we try to attain these perfect temperatures and humidities, and VPD is obviously something a lot of people pay a lot of attention to. I pay attention to it, but I have a very go with the flow type of approach where I just go into my garage and I react to how my plants look. And there are things that so when we talk about high temperatures later in flower, I want to be very, very careful because, like you said, you have newer growers. You have to have adequate airflow and air exchange if you are going to have higher humidity levels. I am fine if it's 90 degrees and 70% humidity at week 6 flower. My plants are loving it at that point. So you just have to keep in mind, you have to keep that ratio appropriate, and making sure that if you have leaves overlapping each other, you're not getting moisture pockets and things like that. So there are things that you just have to be aware of. But higher temperatures, you're going to get higher yields, and your plants are going to grow more vigorously, especially in veg. You have nice high temperatures, nice high humidities, your plants are going to grow very rapidly. So like I said, I tell people all the time when they ask me questions, I say it really depends, because there is no one size fits all solution to this, and or when it comes to advice, because everybody has different growing parameters and different mediums and inputs and things like that. So I try to speak in generalities and add caveats as much as possible.
Yeah, I try to do the same thing because, over the years, people have complained because, like, oh, that's not the right temperature. You can do this temperature instead. And it's like, yeah, you can do 90 degrees Fahrenheit like Kris is doing, right? Or you could go down and do 75 degrees, right? So it's like, you're still going to get to harvest. But yeah, I'm looking at the VPD chart right now, 90 degrees in flower calls for 64 to 68% RH. So it's pretty higher than a lot of people would go in the flower stage because they don't want to do that humidity, but don't want to risk mold, I should say. But you could totally get away with it, especially if you have that airflow. Now I'm usually running about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I try to drop it after week 5, 6 of flower. I'm trying to drop it down a little bit to try to conserve some of those terpenes, right? The flavonoids.
Yes, 100%. And actually, I have a really perfect example of that. We try to work on our weakest variable, right? So I grow in a garage, and I'm at the mercy of the outside temperatures, and oftentimes the things that we can't control are the hardest things. And it's not always about your environment inside your tent that's important. It's a lot of times what your outside is that's driving those inside conditions. So it is not ideal. I do want to be very, very clear to have 90 degree temperatures in week 6 of flower. That is not ideal. And as you drop your temperatures, there are other things that you're going to see happen. Terpene preservation is incredibly important. You're going to see your anthocyanin is going, if it's present in the genetics, your plants are going to get burgundy and purples, and you're going to get that beautiful fall fade with the cooler temperatures. But I actually grew out two clones of Lumpy's apple fritter, Lumpy's cut of apple fritter. And I do a lot of side-by-side testing. I think there is a tremendous amount of value in doing A/B testing for a home grower, because it's low risk. And by failing, you observe what caused it to fail. And I feel you learn from those failures. So it is an important part of the growing process, is that failure. But then also sometimes you have happy accidents and really interesting things happen when you least expect it. So I grew out this apple fritter, earth boxes for both, and I grew one under about 600 par, which is typically the range that I prefer for my flowering plants. 600 to 900 is kind of. I don't push my plants very hard because I don't supplement CO2. So at the lower intensities, I observed the plant's morphology was very different. The flowers were larger. They were firm, but they were not dense, and they had a lot more trichome coverage versus the ones that I grew in another tent at around 1100 par, and all the same inputs, but the buds were smaller. They were much more dense, less trichomes, and the flavor was completely different. And I even grew it out a third time with even less light in a 2x2 tent, and I got gas the first time, I got grape the next time. Just wildly different, all from the same clone, just by altering light intensities. So now you can look at, let's experiment with UVB. There's been studies showing that there's significant terpene production increase with UVB in small amounts in the day, or using red light when you put your plants to sleep to help ease them into sleep. There are all sorts of really cool things that we could do with light intensity and color frequencies and things like that to impact our end result as well.
A really good example of how different climates will yield different results, right? You mentioned the two different clones you had and different environments and two completely different outcomes. So great example of that one. How about day length? Now that's something that people talk about when it comes to crop steering. Talk to us about that.
I've done a few things. When we're talking about indoor controls, I do have AC Infinity lights that have the daylight, the sunrise, sunset feature. I've experimented with that. I wouldn't say that I've gone and done any like true side-by-side comparisons with that by any means, but what I did notice on the few times that I have kind of stepped my plants down, so going from 18.6 to 14 hours on versus going straight to 12.12, I have found a gentler transition. You can make the argument that the plant doesn't care, and if you flip it to 12, it's going to adjust, and you're just going to have more time where it's going to be able to produce at our generative phase. But like I said, I've tried it numerous times. It's something I think we may never be able to quantify it, but at the very least, you'll save energy, and that's not a bad thing. But when we're talking about light duration, we have to talk about DLI. And for anybody who is listening that hasn't measured their light intensity, not saying you have to go buy an expensive meter. They have very effective meters as apps on your phone, and they have little attachments you can get on your phone, and they get really, really close to some of the higher quality light meters out there. But it is super important to have your baseline, to know where your plants are and how much light they're getting, because when you drop your lights from 18 hours of light to 12 hours of light, your plants, think of it as a battery. Your battery's not going to fully charge if you keep your light intensity at the same rate. At that lower duration, so you have to scale it appropriately. So definitely start measuring PAR, PPFD if you are not, because I think that is one of the evolutions of the home grower, is kind of like the next step to really honing in your grow and having full control, or better control, I should say, of your outcomes. So. Yeah, I would say those are probably the things that I've personally experimented with and am currently doing, is just kind of stepping down the light. But again, I don't know if it's something I can necessarily say definitively, like, yes, this is making a positive or a negative impact one way or the other.
Got it. And you mentioned the PAR range that you typically aim for, 600 to 900 ppfd in flowering. I usually do the same range there. I think it's a good general range, but like you mentioned, DLI needs to be factored into it. I have a DLI calculator up right now, and it's pretty easy to use. If you Google it, I'm not sure if folks listening in have done this before, but you just put in your PPFD. So I put 900 and then time hours. That would be how long the lights are on for. 12 hours. That's a 38.88 DLI. And on average, what I've heard, a lot of people aim for about 40, but with the CO2 and other things, people are going up to 60. And that's coming from Dr. Bruce Buggy is one who mentioned that, is people are going up as high as 60, which is pretty crazy there. So CO2 can have a huge impact on things. And that's one thing that we kind of, I get skipped over a little bit when we were talking about climate. Did you have anything to add about CO2? Like, are you supplementing CO2? Is there certain ppms that you're aiming for? How does that factor into crop steering?
So that is actually one area that I haven't gotten into, because I've taken into account the opinions of growers that I know that have supplemented CO2 and measured it, as well as people that I really respect in the industry that supplement CO2. And I think for my style of growing, I determined it to be an unnecessary expense, because, like I said, I am not pushing my lights very hard. I know I'm leaving yield on the table. I definitely know that. But as a home grower, I'm okay with that, because I really am prioritizing the flavor over the yield. Of course, I like to have both. Love to have it all. But that's just kind of really depends on what your priorities are as a grower, and if you need to monetize your medicinal herbs, then and prioritize yield, then that's your prerogative, and it's probably financially beneficial too. Then it'd probably pay for itself. But it's just not something that really fits with my growing style yet. But it's not something I am against testing in the future if the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, I've experimented a little bit with CO2 in the past. Nothing too crazy. Those mushroom bags and the canisters, which a lot of controversy about those on whether or not they work. I have a monitor, so I was able to see it was elevated. I'm no longer using them. Just like you, I'm a small home grower. I exhale CO2, and that's enough for the home I live in, the plants where I am. But it is certainly worth mentioning. I know there's a study out of Utah State University where they did ppm levels of CO2 up to 1,400, and they saw a 30% increase in yield due to that. So it's definitely worth it to increase CO2, supplement CO2 if you are looking for yield, but not everybody's looking for that. And I'm not too sure if adjusting the CO2 up and down would affect the plant in some way, like if people use that in crop steering in order to try to control the growth or whatever. So I guess that's something that I'm going to have to do some more research and figure out.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, essentially what you could be doing is you're stressing it. There's going to be a stress response. And it's not too dissimilar to the way other plants are steered, where they will flip the light cycle between generative and vegetative and use that to actually increase yield. You wouldn't do that, obviously, with medicinal herbs, because they would freak out and re-veg, and you would have all sorts of issues. But theoretically, it's not too dissimilar to that.
So we already dove into light intensity a little bit. You touched upon sunrise and sunset, but there is one thing I wanted to add to that. So there was a study from Dr. Bruce Bugbee, again coming out of UC State University, where he tested sunrise, sunset, that feature of gradually giving the plants light up to full power versus just blasting the plants full power when the light cycle comes on. And what they found was that there was actually faster growth when you just blasting that light to begin. Now, when I had mentioned that in videos in the past, the podcast episodes in the past, you get people in the comments that are like, okay, so the growth rate is better when you're blasting light individually versus the sunrise, sunset. But is there other triggers within the plant that is happening during that sunrise, sunset? And I think that's a question that isn't answered yet. So I figured I'd throw that out there for folks. That's one thing that when it comes to cultivation, we don't know everything yet. Scientists are still uncovering things. So some beginners might be listening to this and be like, oh, there seems to be some conflicting information. Yeah, it's loaded with conflicting information in this. That's the fun part, is kind of diving through and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, experimentation on your own and stuff like that. But the discussion should still kind of go on. And yeah, figure I'd mention that, even though we don't have a clear-cut answer on that study.
Yes, absolutely. Experimentation, man. Like, don't be afraid to just try something, like, what's the worst that can happen? You might lose a plant, but you might gain invaluable knowledge from that failure too. I think when you could see something go bad, you can learn a lot from that, So yeah, like just the troubleshooting aspect of it and researching why things are starting to have a certain reaction one way or another. Yeah, it's all very interesting, but experiment.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Let's dive into irrigation. So this is a key thing that is done while crop steering, like you mentioned in the beginning of this episode. We've got irrigation volume, we've got frequency and timing, we got drybacks. Talk to us about irrigation. I'll kind of just give you the microphone here and drop some knowledge on us.
Sure. So as a grower, new or experienced, watering is, I think, the hardest part to get down. And it's especially important, and I will speak to a lot of these things through the lens of living soil because that is what I have the most experience with. But I think that there's also wider applicability with this as well. Generally speaking, there are things that we could do when it comes to how much we are watering and how frequently we are watering to drive growth of our plants or stunt it more frequently. I think people suffer from. I think there is a common misunderstanding of when we're watering, what is overwatering. It is not a thorough saturation of your soil that is causing the overwatering. It is the thorough saturation and the constant saturation. It's the frequency that is becoming the issue, and your plants don't have a way to breathe. So drybacks are incredibly important. And that's why in living soil, when we as living soil growers we can't let things get too dry, obviously. We have to maintain this perfect balance. I think for us, it's very important to have some sort of a way to measure. So getting some sort of a meter to measure your moisture is, I think, very important. Whether you're measuring your moisture at the bottom or the top doesn't really matter as much, because the way that I see it, if you're able to learn the patterns of when your plant needs water and when your plant needs to dry back, you'll be able to those percentages. So the ebb and flow. That's the most important thing to do. And we could talk hours on watering practices, but the dryback in flowers. So again, biomimicry, late in flower. If you're outdoors growing, less rain. It's the dog days of summer. It's drought-like conditions, right? Your plants are they're going into a preservation mode where they're not going to grow as rapidly, and when you are in an indoor environment, you want to do this a similar type of thing. They're not going to be drinking as much later in flowers. So watering less and less frequently Again, late in the late stages of flower is what you're going to want, because I think you see, if you look in a lot of growers' gardens and you see a lot of the leaves that are kind of they got the curve. Generally speaking, that happen from overwatering, and a lot of times it happens late in flower because you're pumping it with water. You want to give it all those good nutrients that you're giving, all those supplementation with your ferments and other things like that. You need to start backing that stuff off starting at around week 6 or so, depending on the cultivar. Again, it all depends. If you're growing a sativa that's a 22 weeker, you don't need to back off just yet. But if you're growing a hybrid indica, something that's like a 8 or 9 weeker, I would say week 6 is around the time you're going to want to start pulling that stuff back, because your plant's going to drink less, and you don't want to get to a point where you drown your plant and you do stunt your flower growth, because I have done that numerous times. I'm constantly struggling with finding the right balance for watering. It's because I grow in a bunch of different things. I grow in a living soil bed. I have earth boxes and I have autopots, and they all have nuances to their watering practices. So the amount and frequency, very important. Another thing that I have found very satisfying of late, having a friend that's local that has been that Miles from Fermented Plant Extracts was a mentor to. He has his own ferment company, so I have access to a lot of different types of ferments, and I have tried so many different types. And what I have found is that there are a couple in particular that do an amazing job of being like an all-purpose ferment, because the typical I guess process with fermentation is you're trying to encapsulate a moment of time of whatever you're fermenting. What I mean by that, if it's hemp leaves, for instance, that's coming from the vegetative phase of a plant, you're fermenting that, you are going to be getting more of the nutrition and things that are prevalent in that phase of that material's life cycle when it was harvested. Conversely, with flowers or fruit, things like that, those are going to have higher, like geared more towards your flowering phase, and they may have smaller amounts of nutrition like phosphorus and potassium. Although we don't use ferments really for nutrition, it's just kind of an unintended benefit of it being there. But peach and willow, I've tried. Comfrey is amazing for veg, and pumpkin is awesome for flower. But I find peach has given the most robust flavor in all of the different varieties that I have tried it in, and I think willow is kind of a sleeper. I think I don't know that I could speak to why it performs so well. But there were visual differences in my plant's health when I was using the willow. Again, I do it when I compare clones. I run clones so I can do a true A/B test. So when I say these things, it's not me testing these theories on multiple cultivars or even multiple phenotypes. They're usually they're from clone. So you could definitely see a marked difference between the different types of fermentation. So for people that haven't experimented with ferments, I highly recommend ferments as something that you could start incorporating into your watering regimen very safely, and you will see a visual difference in your plants in a very, very short amount of time. Ferments are awesome. Definitely where it's at.
I'm going to have to check out your buddy's website there and probably pick something up, try it out. Going back to irrigation real quick, one of the things you touched upon was moisture meters. I think that's a game changer for a lot of folks here. I think that's one of the struggles of beginner growers is dialing and watering, medium being too wet or too dry. Now, sometimes it's good with the drybacks, right? It does help the plant. But if it's unintentional, well, then it's not good. And I'm waiting for AC Infinity to release a moisture meter. If you're listening, AC Infinity, release one because that's going to be huge. And send me 12 because I'll take them
Yes.
and I will use them. A lot of people are using them. I know there's the Eco Wet one, Blue Mat. I have a Blue Mat one right now, the Blue Mat moisture meter. Very expensive though. It's like $85 for just 1 meter. So hopefully there's more affordable options on the future. But it'd be really, really cool to be able to just look at your cell phone and see what the different moisture levels are and then get alerts when you need to water. I think that would be really, really cool in the future. That's on my hope list.
Yes. Yeah, mine too. I have a couple on my short list for AC Infinity.
But drybacks, one more thing I want to dive a little bit deeper into, because we have folks who are doing this using synthetic bottled nutrients. And that's a little bit easier than doing with organics. Organics, you can kind of run into issues if you are doing these drybacks. I think it's commonly known now that with organics, we're using organic inputs, you're relying on the microbes to actually break down those inputs and turn them into usable nutrients for the plant. And if there's no moisture in the medium, or if it's too dry, those microbes actually kind of either die off or go dormant. And then you need to obviously resaturate the medium in order to kind of get that thing going again. So if you're doing crop steering and using organic inputs, how would you go about doing drybacks?
So I'm actually going to use the autopots as an example because the autopot is, and actually this could be applicable to basically any sub-irrigated system, but I'm going to speak specifically to the autopots. So in a living soil setup, I'm running the XXLs, which are 13 gallons. These are very tall pots. They wick very well. However, you will not be able to wick all the way to the top. So if you are top dressing your amendments, then you are going to have to alternate top watering when you were to make sure that we're breaking down those amendments. So perfect example was today. I actually went in and shut off my reservoir yesterday to make sure that everything was starting to dry back. So as the water started to go down, I have an opportunity then to top dress and water from the top, and I will do this alternating probably every week or so, just to make sure that the top never gets too dry, but also making sure that I'm able to start breaking down the things that I'm adding in, because just by me throwing it in there, even working it into the soil, it is not going to be efficient. It really, or adequate rather. It really does need to have that top watering part as part of it. So I would say the drybacks are immensely important, because you don't want to have half of your pot highly saturated because you had your reservoir going, and then you start top watering as well. Your plants will hate you for it, and it will take a while for it to recover. And depending on how far along you are in flower, it may not fully recover. And it might impact your yield. So I think just being ultra aware of how much water you're putting in and the frequency, and make sure that you do have that dry back, especially if you're doing a sub-irrigated system. It's really an important part of the process.
Good tips. So we talked about climate, light intensity, and irrigation. There's some other things that people do when they do crop steering, which kind of doesn't really fall in the categories. I guess this next one probably could, which is EC or PPM. I know some folks will actually adjust the EC or PPM, specifically when using like bottled synthetic nutrients. Talking organics with the inputs, a lot of people aren't even looking at the EC or the PPM.
Right.
Do you have anything to kind of talk to us about when it comes to EC or PPM and crop steering?
So I have an expensive EC meter. I stopped using it about 3 years ago. I did start in soil, regular organic soil, was not organic, and did go to cocoa for a while, and did the synthetic nutrients for a while, but definitely I was spending far too much time in my garage mixing water, and I was away from my family for far too long. So when I learned of living soil, and one of the highlights being, hey, you don't need to measure things as much and you don't need to pH your water. It's important to pay attention to your pH. I mean, especially if you're adding things like, highly acidic things or highly alkaline things, you definitely want to be aware of it. But I don't measure it. I also, when you're working with organic inputs, I found, at least the products that I have worked with, they don't really spike your EC. So even though I'm adding, scoops of, green aminos and, build a bloom and, maybe some coconut and other things, my EC is staying relatively low. I am also using an RO water system out of necessity, which really does help in my situation. I have well water on my property. I know that there are many people that have this situation as well. My ppm of my water and my pH naturally is like a 9 pH and was like 1,000 ppm. It was crazy high. So it's unusable, because as soon as I started adding stuff, it would put me over 2,000, and it was the danger zone at that point. So I got an RO system, just not a whole house. It's just under my sink in the kitchen. I fill up 5-gallon buckets, or the 5-gallon jugs, I should say, from the grocery store. I have 3 of those, and I have them sitting out in my garage. They kind of get to room temperature, because water temperature is also important. You don't want to put super cold water in there, so it gets to room temperature. It's a little bit more tepid, and then it also it also levels the pH. As it sits out, it kind of stabilizes right at around 7. So at that point, for me personally, EC is just not much of a concern.
Understood. Another thing that's lumped into crop steering but isn't talked about as often, I'd say, is defoliation and plant training. So defoliation, we're really talking about like pruning, for example, pruning the plant, or plant training, the topping, fimming, low stress training. Those things are resulting in the plant having internal changes, right? Stress response, redistribution of hormones, so on and so forth. Can you talk to us about those things, pruning and training and crop steering?
Absolutely. So again, it all really depends on what your goals are. For me personally, as a photographer, my primary objective for the genetics that I run is to maintain a beautiful main cola, so I can have something that is the most photogenic thing as possible. I also have, again, I can't necessarily back this up because I haven't done side-by-side tests yet, like expansive experimentation, but in the limited experiments that I've done when it came to plants that I have topped versus ones that I haven't, I've actually found my yield to be better on the plants that I don't top. And when people see my plants, they are actually surprised when they find out that I don't top, because I'm able to achieve a very even canopy. And I do that by, sometimes I'll bend over the top cola if if I know that a strain is going, or a cultivar is going to stretch on me, or if I'm already in a situation where I know height is going to be an issue, I will very gently train over your apical meristem, and your other branches are going to grow up, and you're going to have a nice even canopy. You're going to accomplish the same thing that you would with topping. I really do believe that the yield is better when you don't top. I find that my buds are bigger and more full when I don't top. When I top, I get, and the perfect example was the Trop Cherry number 8 from Relentless Genetics that I grew. This was their cut. I know what the cut looks like when it is not topped. I topped it and got a bunch of smaller, beautiful buds, but they were dramatically smaller. They didn't fill in quite as much. They were spaced out. And again, I can't say definitively it was because I didn't top or did top, but I have found in my limited experience that not topping definitely does help with the yield. But I will also use monster cropping. I love going in, or super cropping. I'm pretty aggressive with it. Depending if it's early on in flower, even if I crack off one, only the strong survive. You can move on. But you could tape them too, and they'll be perfectly fine as well. So when you do the super cropping, when you're taking and you're bending an aggressive 45-degree angle, your plant is going to readjust to that over time and grow up into the light, but it's going to form this really fat knuckle right at that point where you bent it over, and it's going to improve your nutrient, your highway. Basically, things are going to be uptaken quicker from my experience. So that's another great way to not just manage your canopy's height in an emergency, but to also improve your yields. But then also, I think there are things that we could do to strengthen our stems, because early on in veg, being a house plant grower, I know the importance of having wind. And when you have like climbing house plants, they need support. Plants are not too dissimilar in that, where you are going to have a gentle breeze on them when they're young, so that your stems start to grow more rigid and stronger, and then as the plant gets older and those stems have developed, they're much stronger, you're preparing for larger fruits. So our buds, that's what we're trying to get, those bigger buds. So making sure that if we're not adding poles or some sort of a support mechanism, early on, make sure that you have a gentle breeze on your plants at all times, and make sure that they're going to grow up strong to support those buds.
Getting deeper into wind or airflow, I think that's a good transition here. Is some people are actually using that in trying to stress the plants to get a better result. Now, I'll tell you one quick story. Is I had a tent full of plants, and the plant that was right next to the fan was much frostier than some of the plants that were away from the fan. So
yep.
I think of potential wind stress was helping to trigger some of that secondary metabolite production. But I can't find a whole lot of info online about kind of wind stress or airflow and how that can actually benefit the plant. Do you have any background, any information on that can kind of fill us in on?
I've experienced the exact same thing, Kris. I'm actually experiencing it right now with a Pure Michigan that I'm running. Just because I'm in a very small tent, I have 3 plants running in a 4x2. The fan is right up against it, and those buds are the frostiest. I'll upload a video later just to show it, because I think that there is something, again, we may not be able to quantify it just yet. We may never be able to, but we know, right? We see it ourselves. And I know that we are all trying to have like this image of perfection. Like we want to have all the leaves are beautiful, they're all colorful and all praying all the time. And the reality is by the end of our grow, they look haggard and beaten and weathered, and they're like, good God, put me to death. We just have to keep in mind, we are not growing leaves, we are growing flowers, and the leaves are there to be an indicator of plant health. They could be something that can show you that there might be an issue that you need to address. There obviously are solar panels and they provide transpiration and all of these, but we are not growing leaves. We're growing flowers. So don't be too discouraged if your leaves aren't perfect, if you get the wind burn or you get some curling from overwatering or anything like that. Learn from what may have caused it, but also know that you may have had an unintended benefit from that with that stress response, and we may never know.
Great point. Well, we are coming up to the hour mark here. Let's wrap things up now. Can you tell listeners how they can find you and what you have upcoming in the future?
Yeah. The easiest way to find me is on Instagram at crop_culture_box. Do be careful. There is a known scammer out there who is using my exact profile and everything with a second underscore between culture and box. So you'll see a little elongated line. Do be careful of that. The big tip, I don't use Telegram. So if anybody tries to tell you to tap into the Telegram, it ain't me. If anybody has any questions for me about the box, about growing, I am very accessible, always willing to help people. So please feel free to reach out. And then also you could visit the website cropculture.net and see the things that I have available there. I have a new box that I'm going to be launching October 1st. I'll be announcing that on or around September 1st. Got the new breeder line too, and got some amazing products in this box that I'm super excited about, and I think people are going to be really pumped about as well. So those are the two main places, and I appreciate you letting me come on and speak with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'll definitely have a link to Kris's Instagram down in the YouTube description section below, so you can easily navigate to it. I want to give a big shout out to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Mr. Grow It. Thank you so much for your support. Your support keeps the lights on here in the studio. I'm going to put it on the screen right now, the folks that are in the producer tier. Thank you so much for your support. What did we miss? What else can be added to the conversation? Or what do you do when you crop steer? Let us know down in the comment section below. I'd love to read through the comments and see what you guys got growing on. Kris, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast once again. This was a great talk. If you want to see Kris come back for a part 2, let us know. Put part 2 in the comment section. If we get enough votes there, we'll have him back on and we'll crank back into Grow Talk.
Sounds great. I appreciate it, Kris. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. I'll catch you in the next episode. Peace out.